Greetings, everyone, and welcome back to That's a Take. I'm your host, Bruce James Bales, and here we are with the Season 1 wrap-up episode. This isn't necessarily something that I had planned on doing, but throughout the process of Season 1, I kind of thought it would be smart from an educational standpoint to sort of wrap up the season, revisit what we learned, and then use some of my experience from the year to provide maybe a few more pieces of knowledge to the public or a few more lessons about filmmaking that I took away from my experiences on set this year. Winter in the Midwest is really a time of reflection. It's a time that we don't really have a choice. We are forced to slow down, and we can't help but to contemplate what is behind us and then what lies before us. For me, this podcast has truly been a joy. It's been a highlight of my year. Connecting with people in a different way about filmmaking is something that has really surprised me in many ways, and once again reinforced a lot of the knowledge that I've been gaining over my career, just through other people's perspectives. And truly just really grateful for everybody that's come along the ride and been a part of the show or listened to the show or sent me messages. Those messages are like really very motivational when it comes to continuing the podcast. So if you do have a comment, please feel free to reach out and let us know what you think. So, and speaking of us, I could not do this without Sydney Purick and Nathan Heemstra. And once again, the team here, small but mighty. We're looking to expand in season 2, get a lot of great guests, look for some sponsors possibly, and, just continue this podcast journey and continue providing some filmmaking education out there for people in a way that hopefully is engaging and interesting to y'all. So let me know what you thought of season 1. And maybe even after this episode, you might have even more thoughts about season 1 after we kind of go through each episode and talk about one of the big lessons we learned from our conversation. And then, like I said, bring it back around to kind of what I learned this year. So without further ado, we'll get right into it with episode 1. So episode 1 was with my good friend Marissa Vaughn. And one of the big things we took away from that episode was the idea of trusting yourself and then trusting the crew. This will be a theme that will come back to us again and again because really that's a big pillar of filmmaking, right? Is you need other people to help you achieve your vision. And empowering your crew is really an exercise in trust. And that trust really starts with yourself, trusting yourself in new ways, trusting yourself in the fashion of giving up control and trusting other people to understand your vision and to amplify it. When I work with Marissa, I really do feel empowered, and I feel like I'm a part of the process. I have a voice in the creative. I have a voice in a lot of aspects of the film. And, we're not usually too precious about things. We like to discuss a lot of things before, so we know before we get to set what we're doing. But I think you find yourself in that thing people call the flow state or the pocket much easier when you're trusting the people around you. It's really hard to concentrate and be creative if you don't have that trust. It breeds some doubt, and, doubt can really kill the creative vibe, and you got to be careful of that. And you got to know that you have the right people around you and be aware of what you need from them and communicate that. And I think Marissa did a really great job in episode 1 of providing a lot of examples, real world examples of how to trust your crew and how to let go of control. Speaking of control, in episode 2, we talked to producer and all-around filmmaker Christian Day about producing. What is a producer? What do they do? And one thing that we really focused on was the idea of controlling the production narrative and handling problems privately. And this, once again, is not only, to keep things moving, but it is a vibe thing. It's keeping the energy of production up. It's making sure that, the grip isn't worried about the thing that production can handle, or the, production isn't worried about the thing that the grip can handle. It's making sure that people can do their jobs without worrying about something that they don't need to worry about. And a lot of times, a problem will arise on set, and I've even been guilty of this, where you react a certain way And you can really throw the vibe off. You can throw people's energy off. And I think good producers are really good at handling these problems privately and sort of only letting the people that really need to know what's going on. And I think Christian said something to the effect of, knowing when to say something, but knowing when to redact as well. And sometimes the best thing to do is just not let someone know about a problem until it's handled. And I think a lot of people that end up being crew members who are really valuable and well liked and asked to come back and time again sort of solve a problem before it needs to be an issue for somebody else. Because obviously problems are always going to arise in filmmaking, and sometimes the best thing to do is just handle it without making a big commotion. And obviously if safety's a factor, you got to say something, but this is more so like things that just people don't need to worry about. Like if there's something going on with Crafty, does the director need to worry about that? Absolutely not. So it's maintaining levels of control to just protect the creative process really and the filmmaking machine, like the actual logistics. So really, really grateful for my conversation with Christian. He is really a wealth of knowledge here in the Iowa filmmaking community, provides a lot of assistance and help to a lot of people. And it was nice to pull back some veils of producing. I think producing for some people can be kind of a confusing thing or, misunderstood role in filmmaking. So I really appreciate him coming on and sharing his knowledge. In episode 3, we met with Hannah Rosalie Wright, and we're talking about writing, scripts, screenwriting. And one thing that we really honed in on in our conversation is the idea of script being community, because filmmaking is an art form that brings people together. And for Hannah, it seemed to be maybe even a want for connection, like that filmmaking is sort of a representative of her desire to be part of a community and to work with artists and to be around creative people. And that was something that really resonated with me, even the idea that a script is community, because it does act as a community. It draws people in, much like a business that people like, a coffee shop, for example, that people, word spreads, they have this really great matcha latte, and people go there for the matcha latte and they connect and they meet, and they meet each other and they see each other drinking the same drink. That might be a weird analogy, but really a script is the same thing. It's people are drawn in by a character or a subject, and these are common interests that they share with other people. And then that forms a team, and a team is a community. And a lot of times a team is almost, in some ways, the sports, the former athlete in me is coming out now. In some ways, a team is like the best example of a community, because on a team, you want everybody to be selfless. And filmmaking is definitely an art form where you're wanting people to be selfless. You're wanting people to show up and not forget about themselves. You want them to bring themselves fully, but you want them to bring themselves for this project, for this singular goal, to finish this film and to make it the best you can. And that's something that has always just been so appealing to me about filmmaking is, to be honest, it helps to make me feel not alone. It helps me to feel a part of something. It's helped to give me a purpose. And I think every human being needs that. And to have that through such a phenomenal, inspiring, motivating, enriching art form and profession has been just one of the best things in my lifetime. So the ability to not only make friends, but to make art with your friends is something that is really special. Before I get too much more emotional into it, I think Terrell Christie really summed up in episode 4 one of the missions of this podcast, which is that we have a duty to pass on what we've learned. I didn't really know Terrell very well before this, but I was very inspired by him. Not only his idea of passing the torch and sending the elevator back down and sharing everything we know with everybody else, but his ideas about you know, why shorts are important, his knowledge about VFX, and this idea that we're always constantly building upon each other's work. That's a main reason to share your knowledge, is because you're only as good as like the filmmaker who came before you. Because we're all, I don't think we're necessarily all stealing. I think we're more borrowing pieces. I think the best filmmakers borrow, not necessarily steal. They know they're borrowing it. They know it's not theirs. They're putting it in with pieces of themselves and pieces of other people and pieces of the crew and pieces of inspiration and pieces of literature and paintings and life experiences, all these, the mosaic that becomes what makes a film. And to recognize that and to be able to eloquently put that into words was something that was very important for this podcast, to remember why we're doing this, to remember that those who come before us, they are trailblazers just as we are trailblazers. And this is an art form that is continually evolving. And we're continually learning what filmmaking is and what a film can be. And I think it's important to recognize what came before us in order to find our own voice. So Terrell really summed it up much better than I just did. So that's an episode I would say, go back and listen to episode 4. That was definitely, I'm not trying to pick favorites, but that was one I walked away from feeling very inspired. So shout out to Terrell. Episode 5 was with Dylan Sires and Christian Day. This is a case study about Chiefsaholic, which was a film through Amazon Studios, released Christmas 2024. And Dylan really talked about having a healthy obsession with your project and being okay with, letting that obsession take over for a while, because a lot of the best films have come from that healthy obsession. And Dylan truly does get fully encapsulated by a film, and I mean that in the best way possible. He thinks about everything. He thinks about transitions. He thinks about music. He thinks about titles. He thinks about the edit. He honestly is one of those filmmakers that thinks about the entire piece from start to finish and has a very clear vision of it. So much so that, sometimes the easiest thing for him to do is to do it. That's why he composed for Chiefsaholic as well, on top of editing, and was very involved in the edit. On top of directing. And then he was very involved in the edit because he had a vision. He knew what he wanted and he mapped it out. I mean, he had a very intricate map of it, both physically and mentally. And that made it very easy to trust him, as far as what he wanted and he, knowing that the vision was there. And that's always it always makes things a lot easier when you're working with a director with a vision, because you don't ever want to imprint too much of your vision on it. You want to take theirs and improve it or amplify it. So another thing we talked about with Dylan was just keeping the camera rolling, to get every last ounce of story. I love that phrase that he says, is every last ounce of story. And with Doc, it really is one of these things where you shoot and you shoot and you shoot and you try to find these moments, these authentic moments. And, like Dylan says, sometimes you don't get it, but you still try. And another sentiment he shared in that episode is don't ever let anyone say that you didn't work hard. That's the thing, is you want to walk away knowing that you gave it your all. And I think, Chiefsaholic, without a doubt, Dylan gave it everything he had. So I think he really, made space for himself as a director, which is a great segue to episode 6 with Caitlin Busby, which really the focus of this was making space for yourself and giving yourself a voice. And I think this is one hard thing for filmmakers, right? Because at the first couple films, it's hard to have a voice. It's hard to believe that you know what you're doing. But as you grow and as you learn from other people, it is important to have that crossroads where you say, okay, I've learned, I've worked for other people, I've helped other people's vision come to light. Now it's my turn. And I'm really proud of Caitlin for doing that for herself, not only, but for also sharing that sentiment with us. Because I guess at some point I might have done that subconsciously, but to hear that she did it consciously and was able to put that into words in, you know, the frame of going to grad school and starting to make more films as a director and as a DP, I think it really, it rung true and it resonated. And, you know, having worked with Caitlin many times, it is one of those things where you understand when you see somebody doing what they truly want to do. It's beautiful and it's inspiring and it's empowering, because we all kind of come up in the Midwest, at least, and outside the greater industry, is like doing a little bit of everything. But after a while, you get specialized and you really find a passion for that specialization. And that specialization is like, for me, where people become like artists, you know, and really push the boundaries of that position or that vocation. So, yeah, go out and make your film, you know. I really hope that people that do listen know that you can do it and know that you should and know that you will learn a lot. And hopefully something on this podcast will help you to believe in that. But Caitlin's experience at grad school really framed this idea of giving yourself permission to be a filmmaker. Another person who, you know, I've known for a long time was our guest on episode 7, Josh Goodell, who's living out in Los Angeles, originally from Iowa. We talked about transitioning to a bigger market, moving from, you know, Waterloo, Cedar Falls, Iowa to Los Angeles. And naturally that conversation progressed to lessons he's learned on set in Los Angeles, working on big stuff and with, you know, big names. And one thing that I really liked that Josh said was, you got to know the circumstances. You know, you got to know the circumstances of the shoot, and you got to pick the right gear. And that might seem so simple, right? And it is simple, but sometimes things can get so bloated and then you don't end up using anything, or, you know, you end up 3 hours behind because you're trying to do too much with little pre-production and the crew doesn't know what's going on. And we're working within a realm of circumstances, and these circumstances dictate how we approach a job. And one thing that Josh said that I really like is sometimes it's just a bounce. And it's not a comment on gear. It's not a comment on like, don't use this, use that. It's a comment on know what you're doing and try your best to pick the right stuff to do the job. And not waste people's time by, you know, trying to do too much or too little. It's all about knowing the circumstances of what you're doing. And I think Josh does a really good job of that. And he did a good job of reminding me that even out in, you know, Los Angeles, sometimes it is just a bounce. Then we, you know, in episode 8 with Ben Schmidt, we talked about Ellie and Xavier, his feature film that he produced, directed, edited, shot. And it came back to this idea of community. And the idea that you get to meet really great people through this job. I mean, I wouldn't know Ben, you know, if it wasn't for Ellie and Xavier, really. And our connection has, you know, blossomed a lot of friendships and a lot of work together. And this idea also that a movie isn't just one person, it's everyone's. And Ben, you know, echoed a sentiment I have, which is that, you know, it's not really a film by this person. It's, you know, it's the crew's film and everybody that brings to it, the crew, the cast, everybody, people that are there on set and people that aren't on set, you know. It's something that draws so many people in that you can't help but give those people credit for it. And Ben did a really wonderful job about that. Not only on the podcast, but just in person and in the film. So that's a good one to go revisit if you want to be, you know, inspired about asking your friends to help you make a low budget feature film, because chances are they'll probably help you. Episode 9 with Sydney Purick was focused on acting theory specifically. And this is an episode that, you know, I could have recorded this one much earlier. because I've always been fascinated by acting, and I think there's a lot of misconceptions about acting, or more so that crew just doesn't understand acting as well as maybe they should, at least a basic understanding. So with Sid, story and character drive everything. And why that resonates with me being a DP is because that's the exact way I think that, story and character inform all the decisions I make. And it was good to see that there was a correlation between the visual and the acting, kind of taking the same approach. And also, echoing the sentiment that each script is unique, that the approach for the script is going to be unique to that script, that sometimes like research doesn't work for every script. Sometimes you just got to get into the nitty gritty and learn about the character from, reading the script 100 times. And that this episode really reminded me that across the board, a lot of the things we do as filmmakers, they sort of revolve around the same thing. The decisions we make are like what is best for the story and the character in the moment and the feeling we're trying to convey. And when all those things work in concert, that's when you really feel it. And so then that's stuff that really, really works and draws you in. And a lot of that is through what we talked about with Marissa in episode 1, coming full circle here with episode 10, which is giving up control to your crew and trusting them. Chase Stein, the director of Valley of the Devil, echoed the sentiment so wonderfully, and it was such a poignant reminder that really this idea of trust, trusting the people around you, is so important to getting a film done, because you can't micromanage everything. You will destroy yourself if you try to control every little thing about the film. At least at the indie and independent levels, like you're not going to have the time to do that. You're not going to have the energy, the money, the resources. Of course, there's those people that do that, and they do it really well. But just average, everyday filmmakers probably can't withstand that sort of pressure and that workload. So when you bring other people in, it really is an exercise in letting up control and trusting them. With Valley of the Devil, every department was really trusted with the film in a way that when you're on a set like that, it makes you want to come to work. It makes you want to try harder. It makes you want to get through those long days. And it makes you want to enjoy the process. And that's really what we're here to do, is also to enjoy this. And one big takeaway from me this year and from this podcast and then my experience on set is not only the idea of community, but this idea of hospitality. That filmmaking really should be about hospitality as well. And what I mean by that is that the crew, the cast, everyone involved should be taken care of. They should be taken care of because they're all a crucial part of the machine that creates this highly engaging art form. One of the most engaging, I think, we have. And one of the most just intricate, with all these people doing these things, from carpentry to driving to costumes to directing to cinematography to catering to all of the things. I mean, you're literally working with dozens of artists, and the hospitality part of it really translates into the project. It translates into the effort, and I can't put into words how grateful I am for the crews that I worked with this year. I think the people that I worked with did an amazing job of communicating and caring for each other. And that's something that I think isn't necessarily talked about enough for filmmaking, is the idea of the crew caring for one another. That was one of the things that was really heartwarming for me in 2025, was seeing the crews that I worked together, seeing the crews that I worked with really take care of each other time in and time out, from the little things to like buying each other drinks to, a quick, shoulder massage to, sharing a hammock to, having the espresso machine in the camera truck. It's like we all tried to take care of each other and make the process really feel like home, because the other thing is 9 times out of 10, you're not at home when you do these. And for the 3 feature films that I was a part of this year, none of them were at home. One was in Wyoming and Nebraska, one was in California, and one was in Iowa City, Iowa, and Galena, Illinois, and Quincy, Illinois. So all of them were away from home, and there was just this unspoken need to take care of people that came out with the crews that I worked with that reminded me why I like this so much. I have so many good friends because of this job that it feels surreal sometimes to know all these talented people and to see their successes. And I think that's another thing that I would echo for this year, is to really encourage people to celebrate their friends' success. Overall, filmmaking in 2025, being a part of this podcast, it's all been a reminder that we are lucky. We're lucky to be storytellers. We're lucky to be craftspeople. We're lucky to work within this industry that is full of imagination, creativity, and childlike wonder. And I don't think it's because people don't want to grow up. I think it's more because people want to latch on to that spirit, that freedom to imagine and to see the world as a better place than it is, and to trust that art is a vessel for helping us to better understand the human experience. And I would venture to say that although the landscape of filmmaking is changing rapidly, that films, television shows, documentaries are more important than ever. So without being too cheesy, I would just say and echo something that you've heard a lot. Keep going. Keep making your film. Keep telling your story. Keep honing your voice. I'm Bruce James Bales, and that's a take.